Okay with the cameraman?
Yeah.
Am I in the right spot? Okay. First of all, thank you very much for coming out. Thank you for the extraordinarily kind words of introduction. I've been accused of being a propagandist in various shapes and forms. For a while I was a Russian propagandist. I guess I still am a Russian propagandist. Some people called me an Israeli propagandist for a number of years, and I think this is the first time that I'll embrace the title propagandist with all my enthusiasm, because this is the good kind of propaganda. This is the kind of propaganda that does what I believe in. One of my mottos is knowledge is power. And I believe in the empowerment of the self through the acquisition of knowledge and information. And I believe that if you're going to call yourself a citizen of any nation, if you're going to be a citizen of any community, you don't do your community the honor it deserves if you're ignorant. You have to empower yourself with knowledge and information so that you can be the empowered citizen who can hold his or her elected representative accountable for what they do in your name. That's what makes any organization, any society work. So this is good propaganda because I believe it achieves that. I will point out that two things. One, Tucker Carlson got 1 billion views in one shot, dude. You're 900 million short, but you're going to get there. And two, I used your artificial intelligence thing to get my talking points for tonight's presentation. So if you don't like it, it's his fault. But no, when they invited me to come here and speak, there's an obvious topic, which is Gaza and the situation in the Middle East. But just to jump into that wouldn't do either the topic or me service. And I'll explain why. I have not, and I'm going to apologize right now to all the Palestinians and all the Arab Americans out there. I haven't done right by you for most of my life. I was never anti-Arab. I was never anti-Palestinian, but I didn't see you. You didn't exist to me. I lived my life ignorant of you. So I think I need to explain why that was, and then explain how I got to where I am today, where I do see you, where I recognize you, not just as people, but fellow human beings who share the same values that I have, whether we aren't the same religion. I think that's quite obvious. And we don't come from maybe the same backgrounds in terms of cultural, education, etc. We have different approaches to life, but our humanity is the same. We love our significant others the same way. When we have children, we love our children the same way. We want the same things for our children, a better life. And so why I didn't see that early on is it's actually a source of shame for me. But I'll try and say, I was I call myself child of the Cold War. My father was a career Air Force officer. He served in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. He did 2 tours in Vietnam. He did 1 tour in Korea during the Pueblo crisis. He was deployed on an emergency basis to Turkey. And I grew up during the Vietnam War. My father was heavily involved in that. And then we moved. I went to 3 different high schools. One in Hawaii, not a bad place to go to high school. One in Turkey, actually the best place to go to high school for a teenage kid. The worst place to go to high school if you're the parents of a teenage kid. And then I graduated in Germany, West Germany at the time, again at the height of the Cold War. When I graduated high school, the village that I lived in was right next door to a place called North Point, and that is a place that stored nuclear weapons. My father worked at a headquarters, and he would disappear every once in a while when there was a crisis. He'd go down in the bunker. When we have a crisis during the Cold War, that means there's going to be a war, ladies and gentlemen. That war is going to go nuclear very quickly. Which means if you're my father going down the bunker, you will never see your wife and your kids again. So my father would call my mother in instances like this, and they had a code word, Alas Babylon. And when my father would call my mom, he would just say, Alas Babylon, and then he would disappear. And my mother would try to gather the children around and say nice things, comfort them, because at any moment the world could end. And then you get up the next morning and the world hasn't ended, but this crisis is still there. Now you're a child getting on a school bus driving 40 miles to school, not knowing if your home's going to be there when you get back. Because your father's still down in the bunker, something stupid's going on in Poland, the Russians are mobilizing troops, and we're doing the same, and you see the picture I'm trying to paint. So when I graduated from high school, I was focused on one thing and one thing only: to kill a commie for mommy. Better dead than red. The Soviet Union was the threat, and I was going to join the military, and I was going to get to the front line, to the Fulda Gap, as soon as possible, to be there when the Red Menace came across the border so that I could kill them before they got to my fellow Americans. And this is real. This isn't a joke. Today, people hear that and they sort of chuckle, oh, that's cute, that's quaint. It wasn't cute and it wasn't quaint. It was my life. I later transitioned to the Marine Corps, and my entire focus early on in the Marine Corps was to kill Russians. Literally, that's all I lived for. I woke up in the morning, how can I kill Russians more efficiently? I went to my job and tried to train my Marines to kill Russians more efficiently. I didn't pray for war, but I was ready for war. And then something strange happened. You see, one of the reasons why I was so focused on the Russians is I was an intelligence officer. And when I was in college, I studied Russian history. I studied the Russian language. Anybody who's heard me speak Russian would doubt that aspect of my resume, but I remind people that while I was studying Russian language, I was also playing football and drinking beer. So the language aspect didn't resonate as much as it should be. But I was a Russian area specialist, and that was on my resume. And in 1987, something remarkable happened. Ronald Reagan sat down with Mikhail Gorbachev, who at that time was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and they signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. It was a treaty to get rid of nuclear weapons. And for me, that resonated because I grew up next door to a nuclear weapon depot that I was afraid was going to cause my death. And suddenly someone said, hey, you can go off and you can be part of this treaty. You can implement this treaty to get rid of the nuclear weapons. And I was of two minds, because I wanted to kill Russians. That's all I ever did for 5 years. I woke up every morning, kill a Russian. And now they're saying, no, you're going to go to the Soviet Union, you're going to live amongst them, and you're going to work in a cooperative fashion to get rid of nuclear weapons, which is a good thing. But it was with Russians, who I wanted to kill. And this was a problem for me. So I arrived. I was actually, my life has been a series of remarkable events that have nothing to do with my skill set and just with me being in the right place at the right time. And I actually was the first weapons inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union when the INF Treaty started. I was also the youngest weapons inspector on the ground. I was the least experienced weapons inspector. But you know how you become an expert? There's two routes to become an expert. One is to be a genuine expert. I mean, go to school, study it, get your PhD, write papers and all that. And the other one is to be the first person to ever do it. Because by definition, when it's done, you become the only person to have ever done it. You are, by default, the expert. And so I became an expert on on-site inspection, an expert on arms control inspections, et cetera, just because I was the first person to do it, and therefore I was the guy they always turned to. They said, well, what happened there? And then you'd say about it, then you'd build on it, you get more knowledge. And so I became a very good weapons inspector. And what makes a good weapons inspector isn't just your willingness to do the job for your side, but in the case of this arms control treaty, it was to work with the other side. They weren't the enemy anymore. They were actually my colleagues. I had to get up every morning and go to work with them, working together for a program that we had to both agree upon. It was a very strange thing for me to do, and I think it was strange for them as well, because they looked at me the same way I looked at them. I was part of enemy number one. They were building missiles designed to blow up my country, and they were still building them while I was there. My job was to inspect those missiles. We joked about it when the missiles first started coming out of the factory. The first missile we named Pittsburgh. The second missile we named Des Moines. And the third missile was named Chicago before the people in Washington, D.C. said, this isn't funny, guys. And in many ways it wasn't, but that's the kind of perverse humor you have to have when you deal with these kinds of subjects. So I'm working with these people, but we weren't connecting. There was something missing there. Because when I looked at them, I didn't see humans. I saw Russians. And for me, Russians didn't resonate as fellow humans. This changed on New Year's Eve, 1988. got an invitation to go to one of the Soviet inspector or Soviet escorts' house. He was an engineer, not a nuclear engineer, but a rocket scientist. He built missile parts that go on the missiles that would blow up my house if there was ever a nuclear war. And he invited us to his home. All the inspectors got invited to the homes of their Russian counterparts. So I went there with 3 other people, and we arrived. We knocked on the door opened up. Soviet apartments are very small, even if you're an engineer in a missile factory making a decent salary. It's a very small apartment, a very intimate setting. And what I mean by that is there are no secrets. What you see is what you get. They don't have the luxury of being able to take all the stuff and stuff it in the back room to make the appearance of something other than what reality is. When you walk into a Soviet apartment, you see Soviet life. And I walked in together with our inspectors, and we saw that these people were just like us. They had dirty dishes in the sink because obviously somebody was eating something as we came up, but they didn't have time to clean it, so they tried to hide the dirty dish. But you see the dirty dish. They have paper stuffed under a book on the side, just like us. And then we started talking to them. Great sense of humor. They laugh. We talked about families. They cried. They talked about their children. Their eyes glowed. And you realize, and I was realizing, I just got hit with this epiphany at that point in time. I said, I don't want to kill these people anymore. I want to be friends with these people. And it was one of those life-changing moments. It forever changed my life because up until that time, I was the warrior extraordinaire, solely focused on closing with and destroying the enemy through firepower and maneuver. And after that point, I realized that is the most worthless mission imaginable. That we, instead of learning to close with and destroy people, we should be learning to get to know people, to learn about people, to understand them as fellow human beings, and then work together to accomplish the impossible. What we were trying to do in the Soviet Union to get rid of these nuclear weapons was impossible. There were people in the Senate that didn't want it to happen, people in the White House that didn't want it to happen. We made it happen against impossible odds. And I'm very proud of the work that I and the other inspectors did. I'm very proud of my Soviet counterparts for what we accomplished. I left that job in 1990 and went back to the Marine Corps. And right about that time, August 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And I got thrown out of school and thrown into a special planning cell for the Commandant of the Marine Corps to plan combat operations against the Iraqis. And based upon the work that I did for them, I got requested to go to Saudi Arabia and work for General Schwarzkopf. So off I went to do this. Now, this got me back into the war, and I was happy. You see, because it wasn't the Russians. I didn't want to kill Russians anymore, but I was trained to do war. And now I have my chance to prove myself like any man would want to do. You're trained as a warrior, here's your opportunity to be a warrior, to do the job. And I got heavily involved in what we call the counter-Scud operation. That is, the Iraqi Scuds were fired against Israel. The danger was that if we didn't stop them, Israel would enter the war. The coalition that we had built up to confront Iraq would disappear, and we could lose. So it was a big imperative to hunt these Scuds down. And early on, I realized that we were doing something wrong. You see, the intelligence said Iraq had 19 launchers, and by week 2, we had killed 64. Now, I'm a simple Marine, and I'm not very good at math, but I can tell you that that doesn't quite square. That meant we're killing something we're not supposed to be killing. We're killing something that isn't a Scud launcher, and we're probably not killing any Scud launchers because they keep firing the missiles at Israel. So I became involved in trying to hunt them down, and I had an opportunity to work with Navy SEALs. They had something called a fast attack vehicle. It's a dune buggy. And they fly in with the dune buggy on helicopters when pilots get shot down, and the dune buggy goes off and tries to recover the pilot and bring him back to safety. I came up with an idea that we were going to go to a place that somebody said we destroyed a Scud, and I'm going to do a technical assessment of it. I'm going to go in and take bits and pieces of it, bring it back, build a radar cross section so that we can fine-tune our radars to hunt them down and kill them. And I needed to be on the site. So I met with the SEALs, and I remember the commander said, "You ain't coming with us." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "Because you ain't one of us. We're special. We're the SEALs, and you're not. And I'm not giving up a space on my dune buggy for you." And I turned to him and I said, what space do you give up when you pick up the pilot? He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you have your crew, and you get off the helicopter and you go to get the pilot. Where do you put the pilot? You kick off one of your guys?" "No, we put the pilot in the platform on the side of the thing." I said, "So why can't you take me in on that platform?" And then he realized that I was serious, and the bottom line is they approved the mission. We're getting ready to go. And I have to tell you, as you're getting into the preparation for this, it's like anybody do sports like boxing or competitive sport, that right before the whistle blows, the adrenaline you're feeling, the pump, the uncertainty, it's that moment before the action. This is war, guys. This is it. This is my chance to prove my manhood. I'm going to have a chance to do something where I will be confronted with life and death decisions, and I will get to measure myself as a man, because that's all I believed a man was. Somebody who could stand up and stare death in the face and not back down. So I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to rock and roll. It's the day before the mission's supposed to launch, and we get a stand down order. Stand down. Some intelligence geek like me went through the target data and realized that it wasn't a destroyed Scud. After all, it was a Bedouin tent, and that the Bedouin family had been in the tent. And at night, when it gets cold, they bring the sheep and the goats in. It's a long thing, and so you had heat with the fires and the body heat, and it looked through the infrared like a long cylindrical object, like a Scud missile. So they put 2 bombs in the tent. They killed the family, they killed the sheep. There was no Scud there. The mission was canceled. So now I have this big letdown. I'm out there at night, and I'm with an Australian counterpart, and we're sort of sad we didn't get a chance to go to war. We're also sad by the target reality. We're like, well, damn, that's not what we were expecting. And we're sitting there looking at the stars. Has anybody here heard of the overview effect? Overview effect is something when American astronauts went to the moon. As they come around the moon and they look off and they see the shiny blue marble that is Earth so far away. The overview effect is they suddenly realize how fragile life is, how fragile Earth is. And suddenly things that used to matter to them didn't matter anymore, because they realized that they were part of this grander scheme, this bigger picture. So I sat there and I allowed myself to be transported from where I was, feeling sorry for myself, thinking about all the mission details, what I would have to change now to alter it in terms of the timing, get more reconnaissance, do I need to change the team? And then I moved myself away and I realized I'm just sitting there in the desert outside of, I think it was, I can't remember, Dhahran, I think. And then we're moving back further, and then I realized that I'm in Saudi Arabia. And I moved back further and I realized, no, it's the Middle East, and suddenly all my target planning doesn't matter because I'm looking at a bigger map. And I pull back further and it's the Earth. And I realized there's this thing called humanity. At that point in time, I said, I don't want to fight wars anymore. They're stupid. They make no sense. That I was getting all excited about doing this really minuscule thing, about getting on a helicopter, flying behind enemy lines, looking at some blown up stuff, hoping that the enemy challenged me so that I could kill them. But as you pull back, you say, no, life is more important than that. That's actually one of the dumbest things in the world I could be talking about doing. And I realized I didn't want to be a Marine anymore. That this life that I had spent learning to close with and destroy people didn't matter because humanity mattered. So when the war ended, and I had what they call a good war, I got the right medals and I got the right write-ups and I didn't die. And the Marine Corps wanted me to stay in, but I decided that no, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go off and I'm going to get involved in civilian life and try and be a productive member of society. Seen Godfather, Godfather 2, Al Pacino, Michael Corleone. He's trying to get out of the family. He's trying to become a legitimate businessman. Every time I try to get away, they just pull me back in. That was me. I was off trying to be a civilian, and I get a phone call from the United Nations. It was for a colonel that I worked with in the Soviet Union. Remember when I said the one way you become an expert is to be the first person to do it? Well, I happened to be the expert on on-site inspections. I happened to be the expert on Iraqi Scuds because I spent the war hunting them. And I was an intelligence expert because I knew how to use different collection platforms. They had a problem. You see, the Iraqis had submitted a declaration about the number of Iraqi. When the war ended, Iraq was required to give up their weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons, long-range ballistic missiles. And they provided a declaration of ballistic missiles that didn't add up. And at that point in time, the United Nations realized that they needed to create an intelligence unit. And so my name was Foster, so I was brought in to create the first and only intelligence unit the United Nations ever had. Standalone intelligence unit to hunt down Iraqi missiles. And I did that. It succeeded, but the thing about Iraq is that I approached the Iraqis as the enemy. See, I didn't learn a damn thing, excuse my language. Remember I talked to you, I had that epiphany about the Russians? But with the Iraqis, I reverted. When I came into Iraq the first time as a weapons inspector, they were the enemy. They were hostile. They were trying to hide things from me. I didn't bother to see them. I just was focused on my job. But as you do your job, you come back over and over and over again. You start to notice things. You start to notice the mother, because Iraq, when I first went there, was a wealthy nation, proud nation. They didn't have beggars on the street. But then you start to notice in the squares you drive by, there's a mother with children. You say, that's strange. That doesn't happen in Iraq, but it's there now. And then you see it's over here too, and what you realize is that she's begging because there isn't enough in Iraq to take care of her children. And you count the children, there's 7 of them, but one day you drive by and there's only 6. You're like, what the hell happened to the 7th? But I didn't stop to ask because they're just Iraqis. I have a job to do. I'm a very important man. I'm a weapons inspector. I'm the guy confronting Saddam Hussein. I'm the guy getting international headlines. Then you drive by and there's only 5. Then there's only 4. Then there's only 3. And that's when we stopped. That's when I was with a German. And we pulled off the road and we went up to her and we said, where are your children? I had an interpreter because I don't speak Arabic. And she said, they're dead. I said, well, why? Well, they starved to death. They died of disease. They didn't have fresh water. I went back to UN headquarters. I loaded up the vehicle with all the fresh water I could get. We brought in the rations and everything, and I came off and I offloaded it. And I gave it to her, and I thought we had done a good deal. As we're driving away, we see the Iraqi secret police come in and take it all away from her. I asked the Iraqis afterwards why they did that. They said, it's a shame. You're embarrassing us. You're showing that we can't take care of our people. I said, but she's going to die. And they said, that's our problem, not your problem. Now I'm in this quandary here. Long story short, I began to view the Iraqis as human beings. A lot of people ask me, and they say, why are you such a, and you can use a very bad word to describe me, while you were in Iraq. I was very hard-nosed. I didn't compromise at all. But the reason why I did that is because I owed it to the Iraqi people to finish the job. What I knew is that if I didn't do my job, if I didn't complete the mission of hunting down these weapons, sanctions would never be lifted. In the United States, that was okay with them because they didn't care. Remember Madeleine Albright? 500,000 children have died because of sanctions. That's a price we're willing to pay, she said. Well, it's not a price I'm willing to pay. Not a price my inspectors are willing to pay. We went into Iraq on every mission to finish the job so sanctions could be lifted, so the Iraqi people would never again have a mother in a park with 7 children watching them subtract one by one by one by one because they became humans to me. I started to see them as human beings. So forgive me if I was a hard-nosed inspector. Forgive me if you didn't understand why I was so insistent on doing my job. But it's because I fell in love with the Iraqi people. Now, one of the things I ran into was, as the intelligence officers, we had a problem. We were getting close to accounting for all of Iraq's missiles, but we had a problem. The problem was called Israel. Israel had a very good intelligence service. And my fear was that if we went to the Security Council and tried to write a clean bill of health for the Iraqis, that the Israelis would pull up an envelope and slide it on somebody's door, under the door, and they'd open that envelope and there'd be a photograph of something that we didn't find. And it would destroy our entire case. So I said, we got to go to Israel. They went, you can't go to Israel. So we have to go to Israel. Why? They said, if you go to Israel, you'll be compromised. I said, if we don't go to Israel, we're compromised. I'm not going to Israel to become buddy-buddy with them. I'm going to Israel to find out what they know and to challenge them with the fact that don't be afraid to let me do my job. Give me the information so I can do my job so that the threat you think exists no longer exists and we're able to give Iraq a clean bill of health and not worry about that envelope sliding under the door. So in 1994, I went to Israel. surprise meeting with the head of intelligence. When I got to Israel, they said, "Who do you want to meet?" And I said, "I want to meet."